Welcome to LDM Radio Sports Talk, the show that talks about sports and other topics relatable to sports fans. My co-host again this week is Rowdy Jod.
Hey, how's it going, man?
All right. So, a very, very busy week in sports. It seemed like almost every sport had a little extra something going on, but we're going to start off with hockey and the absolute crazy free-for-all of moves that happened this past week. There was the expansion draft that we covered last week with the Seattle Kraken entering the chat as a NHL team. And now we have the NHL free agency that opened up last Friday. So we're gonna go through some of the bigger list of like some teams that did a lot, some teams that did a little. We're going to start locally. We have the New York Rangers who made big trades, but not exactly big splashes and signings. And then we have the New York Islanders who really didn't, who haven't really done much of anything yet. But we're going to start with the New Jersey Devils because the New Jersey Devils, they got one of the quote-unquote big fish with the signing of defenseman Dougie Hamilton to a very big and lucrative deal. So, John, tell me about the Devils.
Yeah, I think Devils fans have to be excited. We haven't had sort of a big-name acquisition since Taylor Hall, and that was a trade. There's just a tendency for Devils fans to get used to every big-name free agent on the market going to the Rangers or the Flyers or some other team that's so close but not the Devils. I think it's a great deal. Dougie Hamilton has proven that he is one of the top defensemen in the NHL. In terms of the price in the years, that's always something risky when you have a max year contract like that, but that's just the price to deal these days. And so I think Devil fans will be very happy with Dougie Hamilton.
And what we saw here overall was what we mentioned last week, where a lot of the bad teams or the teams who are struggling the past couple of years, they have all the cap space. So like players basically have to decide if they want to, be a part of the movement and maybe not automatically be in a championship contention for a couple of years while the total team rebuilds, like kind of be like one of the pieces to the answer to eventually hopefully winning, or maybe not. But either doing that or going to a contender and taking less money because most of the contenders really don't have a huge amount of cap space to get like the bigger stars. So it's all about what the stars wanted to do. In this case, I think we saw Dougie Hamilton went to a team that had a lot of money, and they have the Devils. It seemed like they're trending upward. It seems like it's not really as fast as I think a lot of Devils fans and have wanted at this point, but they did have those first round picks. They had Nico Hischier, who's now the team captain. They had Jack Hughes, and then they ended up drafting Luke Hughes now. So they got the whole brother movement going on over there.
Quentin, we're waiting for you.
Nothing says chemistry like just getting a whole band of brothers together.
I think it's definitely huge. I mean, for Devils fans, it was sort of this up and down ride when they had this rebuild, and then the year after Taylor Hall won the Hart, he was injured, and so he didn't get to play a full season. And the year after, the Devils were like, we're going all in for Taylor's last year. They added the PK Subban trade. They signed Wayne Simmons to a 1-year, $5 million deal. They made a bunch of other moves that was basically saying, look, we're drafting Jack Hughes this year. Taylor, it's your last year. We're going all in to show you. And it didn't work out. And for the Devils, they've never had a number one defenseman since back when they had, Niedermeyer and Rafalski and Stevens. And they were blessed with so many good defensemen for so long. And then after all those guys left, they've just never had that number one. So to get Dougie Hamilton is it's huge.
Yeah, I agree. It's a big move in the right direction, and if you have enough of these players buying in and coming in, then it makes it more attractive for other people to come in, and if they can eventually
Exactly.
start winning, which is a very big if in what is arguably the strongest division in the NHL, that's basically coming back together now since last year was the COVID alignments there, but now the Metropolitan Division will be back intact. So you have Carolina coming back, who who we're gonna talk about, which they had a lot of moves going on too, and you got the Blue Jackets coming back in. So that they're always like a tough out with the John Tortorella and everybody. So you know. I think the Devils here, they still have a lot of work to do, but they also signed Jonathan Bruner. What do you think of that?
Those are some of the signings that I think kind of fill in the gaps. I think for Devils fans, the biggest thing isn't going to be necessarily the additions. It's going to be seeing Jack Hughes stepping up. Last season was kind of filling in that hole, and same thing. So I think for the Devils, the really key things, is yes, Bernier is going to be great to help them on the back end. He is one of the better goaltenders on a bad team like Darcy Kemper. And so I think that'll be really helpful. But I think the question is between him and Mackenzie Blackwood. They'll be fine if everyone else can sort of step up.
Yeah, and it's just the NHL. We talked about it in past shows. The NHL is going to the 1-2 punch tandem more
Exactly.
widely than kind of like the NFL running back, with the way like we don't get a
Good point.
very rare that a running back now rushes for like 30, 35 yards, 35 touches a game. Now it's like there's a running back one and a running back two to split the load, and that's exactly what we've seen of pretty much the entire NHL get to at this point, other than like a couple of exceptions like Andre Vasilevsky, who actually has Brian Elliott now, who used to be at the Philadelphia Flyers. So they're going to have a bit of a tandem going on too, because it's really hard to play 70 games a season. So yeah. So all right. So let's So we're gonna move. Just touch on the New York Rangers, just because there were some wheelings and dealings right after the show last week. Pavel Buchnevich, who was a winger for the New York Rangers and drafted by the New York Rangers, he ended up getting traded to the St. Louis Blues for Sammy Baez and a second-round pick. What do you think of that move?
I don't like it. I know I've talked to a lot of Rangers fans, and some of them have had mixed opinions. I think everyone knew that Buch was sort of the odd man out, right? Out of all the players that were there for the Rangers, you have a lot of young guys you want to give ice time to, and you're stuck with Panarin, you're stuck with Zibanejad. You've invested in getting guys like Lafreniere, Kakko, Ketel, and all these other guys in the pipeline. So it made sense that he had to be moved. But at the same time, a guy who put up, almost a point per game getting moved for a second round pick and a bottom six player, I don't think that ended up being the return the Rangers wanted, especially if they're going all in on the Eichel trade. I think they needed to get more from Buchnevich, because that could have been a big piece for them in the trade.
Yeah, I'm thinking that when I first saw the trade, it kind of had me scratching my head a little bit, because like you said, Pavel Buchnevich was going to get moved. It was just a matter of time. I actually thought it was going to happen last year.
Agreed.
But the fact that he worked himself up to almost a point a game, gave himself some value. Possibly the Rangers held on to him a little bit too long, but in the return, there was the extension that was signed. So it kind of I think it went into the deal itself that a lot of teams really didn't have the big salary cap space to spend on that. The Blues decided to do that, and you have a guy who he was on the Stanley Cup team of 2018. I think he seems to be in and out of the lineup with injury, but I don't think he's that bad of a player. I think that just not widely known, especially when somebody comes in from the mid or the West Coast,
Right.
a lower level guy. Not a lot of people know him over here, so who the hell is that? You weren't gonna get a top flight player for Pavel Buchnevich, and the second round pick is gonna be whatever they decided to be. If they pick the guy, if they pick the right guy and he's a great scorer and ends up being a 100-point player, then hey. then it's a great move. So we won't ever know exactly what the magnitude of the deal is. But I think it was better to get something for nothing. Me personally, when it comes to a player like Matt Zuccarello, which was very widely loved by the New York Rangers, I think personally that they held on to him maybe 2 or 3 years too long. And the return that they got for him, which ended up being 2 second-round picks, I think if they would have pulled the trigger a couple of years before, they would have been able to get like a much deeper
first
haul
or something.
for
Yeah.
him. Yeah. So it's a tricky situation, but I wish them the best, and I think that I think there's a lot of wingers coming up in the pipeline, and there was room to be made. So whether it works out or not, we'll see. But it was a move that had to happen, which I was okay with, and then they ended up getting Barclay Goodrow from the Stanley Cup winning Tampa Bay Lightning, which I think it's a lower level deal, but it's like it's those glue guys that you get in that
exactly
end up affecting the bottom 6 players, and they end up affecting later on. I think this is when last season they had Brandon Smith, a 7th defenseman playing 4th line winger. I mean, when you have the things like that, you need the depth, and you need the strength, and you need a much bigger lineup. So they ended up doing that, and I think there's still a precursor for a bigger move, but we won't know. It's still the early stages of free agency, and also when it comes to agency itself, like the beginning days, the first couple of days are usually like a lot of people think it's like fool's gold because like people have to. The competition's there, and some people have to overpay just to like win over a player, and like the lesser successful the teams are, the more desperate they have to be, the more money they have to throw out there. So it's a big tricky game that everybody's playing right now, and we won't know really what the end result will be until like the June when whichever Stanley Cup champion is raising the trophy. All right, so we're going to talk about the Philadelphia Flyers now. I have you on. You're very, very adamant that the Flyers did not do. You don't like the Philadelphia Flyers moves. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard. I'm wearing a Devils jersey, so everyone's going to be like, "You're out against the Flyers." Look, I'm going to say it this way. I think if you're a Flyers fan, you're excited, and you're excited because you finally have a GM who is going to say, "You know what? I am making moves. I'm going to do a ton of stuff, and I'm doing it because I want to win now." Right? What the Flyers are doing is saying, I want to win right now with Giroux, with Couturier, and whatever I have to do, if I have to mortgage the future, I'm going to do it to try to win in the next couple of years. And so in that sense, what the Flyers are doing makes sense. The problem is I think a lot of their moves come at a very, very high cost that if the Flyers don't win in the next, let's say, 2 years, they're going to go back to be a rebuilding team. So that's sort of my general take on it, and we can talk about specifics.
So when we're talking about the Philadelphia Flyers, I would say, last year they had the number 1 slot, and they were looking, formidable. Their fans are, all happy and thinking that, they're going to go places, and they ended up losing. So, I mean, they lost, in the early rounds of the playoffs. So, I think, the time was now to make moves, to win now. And then they ended up GM right now is Ron Hextall, who was that's Pittsburgh.
Chuck Fletcher.
But yeah. So
it was Ron Hextall when they lost in the playoffs then this year.
Right. So like we'll look at the moves for face value. So I think the Jacob Voracek trade for Cam Atkinson, I think that's kind of something that could help or hurt both sides. I think it's that was a bit of a head scratcher as far as chemistry goes, but I guess maybe fresh blood and new scenery for both players could help them out. I don't know exactly. That seemed like a bit of a lateral move. Then you get deeper down to it. They ended up getting Keith Yandel on the cheap, who was bought out from the Florida Panthers. That could potentially help offensively and fill the void from Shane Gostisbehere, who they ended up trading for absolutely nothing to the Arizona Coyotes. And talk about the other moves that they have going on.
Let's start with the Atkinson Voracek trade, the one that you pointed out. I think that might be the one move for the Flyers that I really understood, but I didn't understand it from Columbus's perspective, right? So I think, as you said, it's 2 players that are sort of comparable. I think Voracek has higher upside in terms of production, but less upside and off the puck play. And then you have Atkinson, who comes at about $2 million cheaper, puts up similar numbers, but he doesn't have that high end point production. And so for Columbus, it makes sense if you're trying to compete, right? You want to be able to trade for a guy who's a little more expensive, but it's going to, put the puck in the net a lot more. But Columbus just, lost Seth. They traded for Seth Jones. They've just, lost in the last few years. They lost Panarin, Bobrovsky, Duchesne, Dzingel. So it's really weird to me from a perspective when you think Columbus is shipping out Foligno because they're trying to rebuild, and at the same time they're trying to make a move to make themselves better. So I don't really understand what they're doing there. But for the Flyers, I think that extra $2 million in cap space for a player who could probably put up the exact same numbers as Voracek if he's playing with Claude Giroux or Sean Couturier, it's a huge win. Going into some of the next move you talked about, the Ghost of Spear move. I think the Ghost move, you have to look at it in connection with the Ristolainen move because it was really one and the same, right? So the Flyers shipped a second and a seventh to Phoenix, or to Arizona, no longer Phoenix Coyotes, the Arizona Coyotes, to take Ghost's contract, right? That's a pretty hefty payment. So what are they going to do with that cap space? They go and they trade for Rasmus Ristolainen, and they trade a first, a second, and, a bottom pairing, maybe seventh defenseman in Hags. So all in all, to upgrade from Ghost to Ristolainen, they added, a first, 2 seconds, a seventh, and a seventh defenseman. That's a lot to upgrade for a player who has 1 year left on his contract in Rasmus Ristolainen. And that's where I think some of the head scratching starts. Did they make too much? Like, is Ristolainen that much better than Shane Gostisbehere? He's worth, a first, 2 seconds, a seventh, and Hags? I don't know. I'm not sold.
Well, I think in the deeper meaning of it, it's they're banking on him being better. But let's say worst case, I think one of the main strategies that some NHL teams have done is they've stockpiled on puck-moving defensemen. And puck-moving defensemen, they can get you a first-rounder at the deadline pretty easily. We've seen it in the past couple of years. I mean, if there's any more glaring example would be Brady Shea, who was a New York Ranger.
Great
he was
point.
in the middle six defenseman, and he ended up he was like the middle pairing of the defenseman, and pretty solid puck mover, but nothing fantastic. He ended up getting a first rounder from the Carolina Hurricanes at that point. So like any kind of puck moving defenseman is very, very valuable. Mostly the ones on the offensive end, which we've seen in the past years. Ristolainen's been able to do, and Keith Yandle's been able to do. So they're stockpiling on passers. So in a Ristolainen case, if it doesn't work out, like let's say they're having like a marginal season and it's not he's still available, they could trade him at the middle of the season and get maybe a first rounder back, or depending on what the situation is. But and the expiring contract will be valuable in itself. And then if everything's going well, then you basically already got your rental 6 or 8
Right.
months in advance, so that now you're basically at the deadline they would be going out to try to trade for somebody in a Ristolainen mold, so they basically already have them. So if they're contending, then they keep them and they already have their rental. Or if the wheels are falling off and the season's going down the tubes, then they could trade them. So
Exactly.
seems to be the strategy there. But overall, I think Cam Atkinson has a history with Kevin Hayes, and Keith Yandle also has a history with Kevin Hayes. So it seems like they're kind of going more towards a chemistry kind of thing. And you have Voracek, who's seems like a very pass-first guy, especially later on in his career, racking up a lot of assists. So and then you have somebody like a Cam Atkinson, who's a bit of a more of a goal scorer, like you mentioned. So it's just and then you have Kevin Hayes, who's like very pass first. It seems like it's just a lot of pass first guys on Philadelphia, and not enough like gunners to put the consistently put the puck in the net. So overall, I think the moves could work out for him.
And obviously the Ellis trade too.
Oh,
I mean,
trade too. Yeah, definitely.
they ship out Nolan Patrick, a player who was unhappy in Philadelphia, a player who was not performing to Philadelphia's expectation, and they get a really solid defenseman in Ryan Ellis. I mean, he's not the Ryan Ellis of 3 years ago, but if you tell me any team could have Ryan Ellis, I think they would definitely say yes. So I think the hole that was left by Matt Niskanen for the Flyers was very glaring because, as you said, they went from being in the number 1 seed in the bubble to now not making the playoffs this past season. And really the only difference was they lost Matt Niskanen and Carter Hart wasn't superhuman. And so they've, adding Ellis, adding Ristolainen, adding Yandel, they're really stocked up on that defense. And as a Flyers fan, no matter what the cost is, it is still really exciting.
Yeah. So, for the the state of Philadelphia, who has the tag of being a very rough fan base, they're thirsty for a winner. So them going in all in for it is a surprise to no one. Now, the moves they could pay off. Health is a big issue, but health is going to be always a big issue for everybody. So it's definitely worth the risk at that point. So let's talk about the new team, the Seattle Kraken. So it seemed like when we had our show last week. He was, they kind of made a lot of head-scratching move, a lot of low-level moves, but they had a lot of cap space. And tell me what they did with the cap space.
I wish I could tell you because it doesn't make any sense to me. In terms of, look, they signed a couple of fairly decent-sized free agents, right? I think the biggest move they made was signing Grubauer to a 6-year deal. In terms of value and price, it's crazy to me that we have 2 of the 3 Vezina nominees, both no longer with their team. Fleury gets shipped off essentially for nothing to Chicago, and Grubauer doesn't get re-signed by Colorado. Both of them had career seasons, both up for the Vezina. And so I think Seattle gets a really, really strong goalie at a great rate. The question is, why are they going to use the cap space on a goalie when they just signed Dreidiger for 3 years and when they didn't take win-now players? So, I think what Ron Francis is trying to signal is that he intends to start being competitive in year 2 or 3. Whether that lines up with the moves he made initially, I don't think so, but I think that's what he's trying to tell his fan base. And, of course, Seattle also – I believe they added Jaden Schwartz from the St. Louis Blues. Kyle, you were talking about Sammy Blais. He's a guy who has cup-winning experience, lots of playoff experience. He's gritty. He was very key for the Blues. Guys like him and Braden Shen, the Blues have always played a more heavy game historically. And so I think that was another great move for Seattle. But they still have a lot of cap space, and let's see how they keep going.
Yeah, they definitely have a lot of fluctuations. They also they ended up selling a couple of players back to their own team. Derek Vanacek from the goaltender from the Washington Capitals. They selected him, and then they ended up trading him back to the Capitals for a second round pick. And they traded Gavin Barrether? I want to say. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce the name, but defenseman for the Columbus Blue Jackets. They ended up selling him back to the Columbus Blue Jackets. So that goes into the selling players for draft picks, like you were mentioning. Not quite the way Vegas did, but they did end up getting some value for the players that they ended up picking. Just seemed a little like it was just a little later. Like Vegas was kind of like boom, boom, boom with their deals. This one seemed to stagger out a little bit. They also signed Alex Wenberg from Florida, who seemed to be like coming into his own a bit, especially late into the season last year. So the Seattle's they're making some moves, and I'd have to agree with you on being competitive maybe in 2 or 3 years. But if they end up making the right moves, they'll definitely make it up to that point. But it's just it's very, very hard to follow up with what the Vegas Golden Knights ended up doing. Like they set the bar really, really high.
So high. So as high as it can go.
If you take Vegas out of the equation, this seems to be kind of like a regular expansion team kind of moves and going through the motions and wheelings and dealings and things like that. But Vegas, man, they it's just very hard to compare to.
Yeah, I think it just goes to show how teams did not want to deal with Seattle the way they dealt with Vegas. And the perfect example is the Washington Capitals and what you said with Vita Vanacek, right? They let Vitek go to Seattle, right? They didn't pay to protect him. They didn't, trade him to another team for value. And Seattle, for some reason, decided to take him, but in my head, they were going to use him as a backup while having Dredger. They then signed Grubauer, so now he is useless. So Vanacek is not going to be on their roster, and so they train him back to the Caps. Well, the Capitals also had exposed Brendan Dillon, and Seattle didn't take Brendan Dillon. And then the Capitals trade Brendan Dillon to Winnipeg for 2 second-round picks and trade one of them back for their goalie. So by not dealing with Seattle, they were able to make use of their own assets. And I think with Vegas, a lot of teams were like, oh, you saw some trades like Marcus Johansson went to the Devils for second and third, so that way he wouldn't be exposed to Vegas. But a lot of teams were like, well, you just deal with the Vegas directly. Now you saw teams play it a lot smarter, and it made it really difficult for Ron Francis. I don't want to make it sound like he had the easiest job. He had the absolute hardest job. Could have done better, but he had a hard job.
Absolutely, because you look at the fact that Philip Grubauer, who's a reigning Vezina Trophy finalist. I mean, I'm sure Seattle wasn't the only team in contention for picking him, so he could have easily picked another team to go play for. So then, if they would have picked Dillon, they would have been, not even in, they would have had. Right. They would have not had enough goaltending going into it. So, it's hard to kind of see, how everything plays out is one thing, but, seeing as how it happened, you can't really predict that he was going to pick Seattle because, all tampering laws and things like that. So, they did the best. I think, he's doing the best with what he could. And, well, we'll find out, this is why they get the big bucks, So we'll talk about the Boston Bruins, who were very, very busy.
Bruins.
They have made a lot of moves. Not really. They re-signed Taylor Hall, which I guess is a big signing for them.
Huge.
That's big on their own because they ended up getting him for less than what he signed for last year. But they made a lot of lower level moves, and it seems like they got a lot of glue guys. So they ended up getting Eric Hula and Thomas Nozak, one from the Predators, the other one from Vegas. And they ended up getting Landis Ullmark, goaltender who was playing for the Buffalo Sabres and was like the one bright spot of the Buffalo Sabres aside from Jack Eichel. He ends up going to the Bruins, so that knocked out Yaroslav Halak, who ended up going to Vancouver. And, so they basically...
They got Nick Foligno, too.
Yeah, and then they signed Nick Foligno as well, former Columbus Blue Jackets captain. So, it seems like they made a lot of really, really, really solid signings to go complement the perfection line that they have going on. What do you think of the moves they've made so far?
I mean, I think Boston's doing what everyone expected the Rangers to be doing this year, right? Which is, look, we have... a core, we have a lot of value. Let's just make some small tweaks, right? Kind of like what Tampa did in 2020 after losing to Columbus. They didn't do this big sort of shakeup. And so that's what Boston's idea was, right? Taylor Hall played great for Boston in the regular season. I think he ended up staying with them for 18 games and had like 15 points, something like that, almost a point per game, showing flashes of his normal brilliance. For him to take a $6 million deal for 4 years is him saying, I really, really want to be in a place where I can try to win. Like, he picked Boston, right? Yep. He handcuffed the Sabres and said, you will trade me only to Boston. And so Boston gave the Sabres nothing. But Taylor Hall is saying that he wants to be in Boston, and that's got to be exciting. There's nothing Boston fans love more than someone who loves the city of Boston, takes pride in the city of Boston. And so I think Boston is actually one of the better teams after this offseason.
Yeah, that's another one that started out with the heavy expectations, and it seemed a lot of people were picking them to win the Stanley Cup last year, or at least even be in the finals, and they weren't even able to do that. So they made a very, very strong moves from the underbelly. They didn't have to really get Antero Panarin or somebody like really, really big stature. What they had to do was just fix the infrastructure, and that's exactly what they've seemed to do at this point. And one note that I skipped over was that Martin Jones, formerly of the San Jose Sharks, is a Philadelphia Flyers goaltender now. Yeah. So that was another one of their moves. So
I think you skipped over it on purpose because everyone wishes that it was skipped over. Sorry, Flyers fans. I think you'd agree with me on that one. Martin Jones was not the victor, but they need a solid backup, right? They need someone who's going to be behind Carter Hart, who's kind of shaky. Out of all the goalies that were on the market, is Martin Jones, in the top 5 free agent goalies I would have picked? Probably not. But I understand what the Flyers are trying to do there is try to get someone experienced, someone cheap, who could potentially recover a lot from. He was great in San Jose for the first year or two he was there.
Yeah.
I think that's what they want to see out of him. It's just a guy to back up Carter Hart and who could be a good fill-in.
Yeah, and then like Martin Jones was a backup for the Los Angeles Kings when they won their last Stanley Cup. So like maybe he's just better as a backup. You look at who we mentioned, Halak, who when he's in a tandem role is better than when he's like the main guy or when like the de facto starter gets hurt and he has to play a ton. So some guys are just better in the smaller roles, and Martin Jones possibly could fit more in that role than just being the starter and playing like 60 games a season.
Yeah, and it's great that you bring up Halak because another goalie I would say that fits into that comparison you're making, someone who's just better in a tandem, is former Philadelphia Flyer goalie and former tandem to the St. Louis Blues Yaroslav Halak, Brian Elliott, right? Elliott was great, and the Blues were kind of stuck where they're like, we have Halak, we have Elliott, we want Ryan Miller. They couldn't decide, and Elliott became the guy, and then he just wasn't the same as they thought he was, and same thing, he went to the Flyers, and we know that story. But
it seemed like the Blues at that time that you're mentioning that you highlighted. It's funny that you highlighted because they were kind of like one of the first pioneer teams when it came to the tandem goaltending, and then as the years have progressed, it seems like more than half the league is doing it at this point. All right, so we're gonna talk about the Dallas Stars. The Dallas Stars made a couple of underbelly moves. They signed Brandon Holtby, who was a goaltender for the Vancouver Canucks. He ended up getting bought out of there. So, I got to imagine this is more of a tandem kind of deal than being the lion's share of the starter. But we have him going there. We have they signed Ryan Suter, who is a long-time defenseman for the Minnesota Wild. So we have another. They capitalized on another buyout there. Tell me about the Dallas Stars.
Look, I think the Dallas Stars are another team, kind of like the Boston Bruins right now, who are looking just to fill holes. I think Dallas thinks they're still the team they were when they went to the Cup Finals against Tampa, and not the team they were last year. And I would agree with that. I mean, they have Mira Heiskanen, and they have a lot of players who are young and who are great. One of their players, his name's literally escaped me right now, who is just up for the Calder trophy, the young winger. So they have a lot of great players. You still have Sagan, you still have Ben, you still have Radulov. And so I think they're just looking to fill in the hole, right? When your top 3 defensemen are going to be Ryan Suter, John Klingberg, and Miro Heiskanen, I think you're in great shape. And Holtby is just going to be kind of the role that Bishop filled, for example, before when, Qdobin took them to the Cup run. He's going to be that veteran presence. He's going to be able to fill in games. And we've seen how important it is to, as you say, have sort of a 2-goalie tandem. And you've seen a lot of really, really, really good starters who were great starters back in the day, as they're getting older, kind of falling into this sort of vet role. Ryan Miller, when he went to Anaheim, and played back up to Gibson, is the example of that. And I think Brandon Holtby is going to be the next Ryan Miller. He won his cup. He's content. He just wants to play.
Right. I agree 100%. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for Vancouver because it seemed like such a good fit last year at this time. But, they, it happened. So, like, we'll talk about let's talk about for a second here what the Arizona Coyotes were able to do for the future and for right now. Right now, they went back to their old days of being the contract wasteland, where you basically their value as an NHL team is to take on the bad contracts and also coupled with the draft picks. So tell me about those moves and how they were able to get a better future out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the Coyotes filled in the void that Seattle didn't for a lot of teams. I think it was great, right? So they, took on Andrew Ladd, that contract. They got a second round pick and I think another conditional second or third. They obviously took Ghost's contract for the second and the seventh. They traded Darcy Kemper, who is another goalie who everyone says, is would be one of the best goalies if he's on the right team. And I think no one disputes that Darcy Kemper is great. So much so that Colorado was happy to lose Grubauer and was willing to pay to get Darcy Kemper. And so then obviously the biggest trade for the Coyotes, the big blockbuster shakeup, moving Connor Garland, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and getting a whole host of bad to mid-bad contracts. Louis Eriksson, Jay Beagle, I think Roussel was in there.
Yes.
But they also got, a first, a second, and a seventh to take those contracts. And so I think the Coyotes are definitely looking to rebuild. And I think this is what the aftermath is of they had the tampering incident where they were, the scouting incident, I guess is probably the better word. And so they were penalized for that. And I think they wanted to get picks, and they want to really have a star in Arizona. They have just not had a star marquee player in forever. I mean, can anyone name someone outside of Shane Doan? Clayton Keller had that one really great year. They traded for Kessel, that didn't work out. They traded for Hall, that didn't work out. So yeah, I think that's kind of where Arizona's moving.
Yeah, it always seems like they're like almost there and then they take a step back. They're almost there and then they take a step back. And then, this year with the losing, if any team, losing a first rounder would be crippling, it was definitely Arizona because, they basically need all the help they can get at this point. And they weren't able to do it. And then, you could see, when, they have a great fan base, their attendances and all that great, but, they've shown when they do have a winner and a presentable team, like even if they get anywhere close to a contention team, all the fans start coming out and it's like, it seems like a really great deep-rooted fan base. It's all about bringing them out. So now, that they have this future plan in place, they ended up getting a first rounder this year from the aforementioned Vancouver Canuck deal. And then, they have 2 first rounders next year and 5 second rounders next year. So, it's going to take a little bit, but, like the wheels are in motion now for hopefully they can, start parlaying some of this into some winning in a couple years here. But, this is, what we've seen this year is like we've seen it from the Coyotes before because they ended up having Chris Pronger was traded over there, never played a game over there, but they took on the
Datsuk,
Pavel Datsuk, another one. Basically, the greatest players of the franchise have never played a game for him. So it's just so in seeing at this point what they've done, it seems like kind of like a little side joke and all that stuff like that. But the long-term effects of it hopefully ends up working out if they play their cards right. But now they're sitting in a better position now than they were a couple weeks ago, which is great to see for them and their fan base. Who some people say, oh yeah, they don't have fans, but realistically they do have fans, and they have a great fan base. And Arizona itself, hockey is just absolutely exploding down. The product of it is Austin Matthews, so like the hockey in the desert. They just need to basically bring it out there. So the sooner that the NHL can get a winner in Arizona, the better off the whole league would be.
That's what I was going to say was I think they're waiting for Austin Matthews to come home. They're waiting for Toronto to run him out of town after his contract ends. They're going to say, look, Austin, come here. We are ready for you. Realistically, will that happen? I don't know, but let someone dream for once, right?
Very possible.
I want
that. They also
happen.
took on Andrew Ladd from the New York Islanders. So they also took that dump of a contract. So that actually helped the New York Islanders. I thought the New York Islanders would be at least sign like one big fish, but Lou Lamoriello, that guy knows what he's doing. So whatever he ends up doing is going to be great for the team. So we talk about the Chicago Blackhawks. So they ended up making they made a couple of splashes here. They ended up trading for Seth Jones, who was longtime Columbus Blue Jacket defenseman, and they made some other moves there. Tell me about the Blackhawks and how much of an impact do you think that they will have next season?
The Blackhawks are making a statement, right? They almost made the playoffs last year without Jonathan Toews, right? I think people forget that because they, performed sort of at the same rate that they've been performing the last few years, which is kind of like a bubble team that doesn't make the playoffs. Or I guess last year they played in the bubble, whatever. But people didn't realize like they did this without Jonathan Toews this year, and that signaled to Chicago, hey, we're still in this. We can still win with Kane and Toews in our core. And so they're doing a retool, kind of like I'd like to compare it to like St. Louis Blues right before 2019, right? They did the retool. They added Braden Shen. They added Ryan O'Reilly. They wanted to play around guys like Vladimir Tarasenko still, and instead of rebuilding. That's what Chicago is doing. I think it's great for the fan base. I think it's great for the league. Seth Jones, a lot of people say he's about to be overpaid. I'll say, show me one defenseman who signs a contract at the age of 27 who isn't overpaid, right? Every big-name defenseman that hits free agent gets that money. Doughty got that money. Carlson got that money. Burns got that money. Zubin got that money. They have free agency. They get it. Dougie Hamilton, perfect example. So when you look at what the Blackhawks traded for Seth Jones, they traded almost the same amount. I mean, Adam Boqvist is a great prospect, but they traded Adam Boqvist a first and a second. We were just talking about how the Flyers upgraded from Ghost to Risto for a first, 2 seconds, a seventh, and Hags. When you look at it in that context, wouldn't you want Seth Jones? I mean, for that price, I think it's a great deal. But obviously, Seth Jones alone isn't going to change the Blackhawks. They moved Duncan Keith, which was a contract that was ailing them. It was a contract signed back in the day when front-loaded contracts were a thing. They won 3 cups off of that contract. Keith was a perennial Norris contender in his prime off that contract, and he was very underpaid for a long time. Cap hit wise, salary wise, he was making a great value. But that contract ended up, aging as everyone expected, right? If you give a really long contract to a player who's going to be in their late 30s, they're going to slow down, especially a guy who's playing 32 minutes a night in the regular season, which is absolutely unheard of. Him and Ryan Suter are the only defensemen who ever played that much in the modern day. And so moving on from him gave them some cap space, and they used that cap space, right? They took Tyler Johnson from the Lightning for a second-round pick as well, so they're restocking the cupboard. And the biggest thing is Marc-Andre Fleury, who they received for literally nothing initially, and then they ended up throwing in a minor leaguer who Vegas loaned the minor leaguer back to Chicago's affiliate team. So take that with what you will in terms of the value that this player was going to be to Vegas.
Yeah, we can only hope that Marc-Andre Fleury ends up actually playing. But let's take a step back here for Seth Jones. I'm a huge fan of Seth Jones. I think as far as like players dividing up time and kind of like being like a tandem in different positions, like Seth Jones is one of those ones that is like an Andre Vasilevsky for goaltending, playing 30 minutes a game. He's great offensively, great defensively. And then, you lose a Duncan Keith who's been a decade and a half, like the top star defensively for the Blackhawks, and then you fill him in with Seth Jones. I think it's a great move for them, and it still says that they're in win now mode. And with the stars they have, obviously you have a Patrick Kane, you have Jonathan Toews coming back, hopefully at full strength, and then you have Alex DeBrincat and Kirby Dach, and it just seems like a lot of weapons on offense and a solid defensive core to build around. So the X factor is going to be what happens with Marc-Andre Fleury. He's kind of like in a haze over there, which it's I think it's pretty sad what ended up happening with him and the Vegas Golden Knights. And the guy can't catch a break. I mean, he was pretty much shunned away from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and that did not end up working out in the Penguins' favor overall. And now, the Vegas Golden Knights just decided that Robin Lerner was better for them, and they have to spend all their money elsewhere and weren't able to keep Marc-Andre Fleury, even though Fleury wanted to stay and was adamant about staying as a Vegas Golden Knight. What do you think about that development there?
I mean, is there a guy anyone doesn't like in the NHL other than Marc-Andre Fleury? Like, I feel like he's the one universal player that every fan just loves. His on-ice antics are great. His off-ice antics are great. Everyone hears the prank stories. My sister, she does massage therapy, and so she has gone to work with some of the players for it, and she tells me all these great stories of the pranks. Marc-Andre Fleury is a prank legend. But he's also a great player. And for the second time in his career, the second time in his Hall of Fame career, Marc-Andre Fleury, 3-time Stanley Cup champion, 5-time Stanley Cup final appearance, and countless, conference final appearances, was traded for negative value.
Yeah.
The first time he was, not traded to Vegas, but the Penguins paid them a second-round pick to take Fleury off their hands. And then Fleury makes Vegas a franchise. If Marc-Andre Fleury does not go to Vegas, Vegas does not go to the conference finals. They do not get put on the map. They have no players that anyone likes. I don't know if their fan base takes off. He made that city, and they threw him away for nothing the year he finally wins his first Vezina trophy. Appalling.
Yeah, just absolutely. I don't. A lot of people make a big deal that they didn't get anything really in return for him. I don't really think that plays into the part. I think it's just him personally. He wanted to be on the team, and he ended up getting traded. It really doesn't matter what there was, whether it was something or not, anything that helped Vegas. I mean, at the end of the day, he just is not going to be on the Vegas Golden Knights, which is where he wanted to be and where he was loved and beloved. I think that was the biggest disappointment for him. So depending on how everything shakes out, we'll see if he ends up actually donning a Blackhawks uniform, or he just decides to just punt away the NHL altogether. It's unfortunate for him, but at the end of the day, he's had a great career. If this is it for him, it would be crappy if this is the way it actually ends for him, but we'll see what happens. So the last team we're gonna talk about today is the Los Angeles Kings. They made a couple of moves there. They added Stanley Cup finalist of Phillip Danault from the Montreal Canadiens, who was a very sought-after player from not exactly from a robust offensive standpoint, but from a defense and face-offs aspect. He ended up getting a good amount of money from the Los Angeles Kings, and then they signed Elder, too, who was a longtime Vancouver Canuck defenseman. Tell me about the Kings, and what do you think they did?
I think the Kings are trying to climb out of their really short, I guess what I would call a retool. It wasn't even a rebuild. With Quinton Byfield and a lot of these players they've drafted. Danault gives them a really solid second center option behind Anze Kopitar. If you want to tell me you take a player, who is really good defensively, tell me, a two-way center, and you say, who would you have mentor this person? You have 3 options: Barkov, Kopitar, Bergeron, and maybe Couturier. So 4 options, right? Those are 4 of the prime two-way centers in the league, and he's going to be behind one of them. So his game's only going to elevate to the next level. I think at Tennessee, you add some speed to their top 6. He was a player who was kind of up and down in Detroit. He had flashes of brilliance, then flashes of where are you, which is very common, I guess, for a lot of Red Wings fans. Manta was another great example of that. But I think the Kings are saying we are back and we are ready, and I think that's definitely great to see them back there.
Yeah, their youth. A lot of what you'll see is the top 2 farm systems will be either the Rangers or the Los Angeles Kings, depending, I guess, on what side of the fence, what side of the coast you're on. But definitely those are 2 of the top 3 or top 5 deepest farm systems. So the Los Angeles Kings, they've had they've had a lull the past couple of years, but they are definitely on the upswing. And I think this was a great leadership move, kind of like what Ryan Callahan did when he went to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Initially, it was that one guy who you're just going to pay a little extra for, even though he doesn't have the robust offensive production, he gives you more of everything else, like more of what's not on the stat sheet. And that's exactly what Dano is going to do, especially with Kopitar and Dano on the same team. I mean, like,
so tough to play against.
They're going to be so stout up the middle. I mean, there's basically that's your whole, penalty kill is going to revolve around those two. I mean, there's just so many options, and so and it's going to basically open up everything else for the rest of the team. So they're going to be pretty exciting to watch in the next couple of years. All right, so that's our show for this week, and thank you very much, Rowdy,